Hello, the Internet. Welcome to Open Source Directions, hosted by OpenTeams, the first business-to-business marketplace for open source services. Open Source Directions is the webinar that brings you all of the news about the future of your favorite open source projects. I'm a mathematician. My name is Melissa, and I'm a software engineer based in Brazil, working with open source software and communities at QuantSite. And I'll be your host for Open Source Directions today. Co-hosting with me today is...
Hi, I'm Madikan, and I'm really excited to be co-hosting for this episode of Open Source Directions. I'm a postdoc at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I work on an open source project called the YT Project, and I'm based in Urbana, Illinois.
I should perhaps go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Yetunde, and I'm the product manager at Quantum Black, part of McKinsey & Company. Quantum Black is kind of an advanced analytics company that was acquired by McKinsey a few years ago. And what we do within my unit is that we help build products for data engineers and data scientists, including one called Kedro that we're going to be talking about. It's a Python library that makes it easy to build production-ready data pipelines. Kedro is also McKinsey & Quantum Black's first open source product, which is pretty cool. We'll probably get into that one. In my past, you'll find that I'm an MBA graduate from Oxford, and my background includes being a data product manager in the banking industry, and I've also worked a lot in the nonprofit space. But if we go way back, I'm actually a mechanical engineer by degree and through work. And I'm actually from South Africa, so if there are any South Africans online, say hello. I'm based in London now.
Cool. So, well, hello, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Laís, and I'm developer advocate for Quantum Black. So I don't need to introduce Quantum Black, as Yeto already did that amazing job. So my background is in civil and environmental engineering and in customer service. I work with some Python. I'm a Python activist. I volunteer a lot for the Python cause. And I'm also an undergrad and only recently started building a community around Kedro. I'm originally from Brazil, but right now I've been living in Dublin, Ireland.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to have Yetunde and Laís today with us. But first, before we start, we'll go to our famous Tweet of the Week section, where each of our panelists will present a tweet that they have been enjoying recently. Yetunde, you're first up.
Sure. So I'm actually going to show you two. We'll talk about two because I spend a lot of time on Twitter, but the one that gets me off like quite a bit is, it says, Friday fun fact. In 1974, Ramesses II was sent on a flight to Paris for preservation and maintenance work. So, you know, Ramesses II was a famous Egyptian. But since French law requires every person, living or dead, to fly with a valid passport, Egypt was forced to issue a passport to the pharaoh 3,000 years after his death. And the actual tweet includes like an image of his passport, of what was used. But the second tweet that made me laugh was that our product's name, Kedro, we do have an active community of like people that tweet about Kedro all the time, but it's also a person's name. So when I saw a tweet that said Kedro probably got an OnlyFans, I was laughing a little bit about that.
Naming things is hard. So yeah. Laís, you're first. You're next.
Yes. So for me, the tweet of the week was this one that I saw. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the new Christopher Nolan movie called Tenet. Like it's super confusing, apparently. So the tweet of the week says, if you're confused about recursion, go watch Tenet. You're going to be even more confused, but at least you would have seen a good movie.
That's awesome. I'll share mine. This is something that made me laugh. It's a video of a guy who was playing the piano and singing about 168 AWS services in 2 minutes. It's hilarious. He'll just go mention every service he can, and then he edited the video to have the actual logos of each project showing up as he sings them, and it's just great. You should check it out.
I love it. All of these are so good. And I love the passport photo, by the way. It's amazing. So mine is a link to a profile, but it's really like active this month, and it's the Mineral Cup. So this is a like contest that's going on Twitter where people debate over their favorite minerals, and so slowly it'll like debate down to a final match between two minerals. So you get to see some like and so people vote on their favorite mineral in each matchup, and you get to see some amazing science communication, but also some extremely nerdy discussion justifying why somebody might like, uraninite over another cool mineral. So I obviously vote for the radioactive ones, but mine are not winning. So anyway, check it out. It's really cool. So
that's great. Yeah, so thanks for that. And I think we can jump into our main subject, which is Kedro. Kedro is an open source Python framework that applies software engineering best practice to data and machine learning pipelines and helps optimize the process of taking a machine learning model into a production environment. It has about 3,000 stars on GitHub, and it has also about 70,000 downloads a month across PyPI and Conda, which is super awesome. And we'll be happy to hear about it today.
Yeah, so starting off, I'm really curious if one of you could tell me who started it, why it was started, and what need it fills.
Sure. So Kedro has been around within Quantum Black for the last 2.5 years. We only open sourced it sometime last year in June, but it was originally designed by Aris, Valtazanos, and Nicholas Sausis. They're two machine learning engineers within Quantum Black to solve problems that they were facing when they were working on project work with the different clients. So, our model is we're part of McKinsey. We deliver advanced analytics solutions to clients. They ran into some problems when it came to how they chose to collaborate with each other when they were trying to produce kind of like production code, or you can think of it as machine learning products that are functioning. But following that, that version of Kedro, back then it was called Carbon AI, was actually redesigned and rebuilt. And it was rebuilt as an internal product by a team that includes like Teres Ahrens, Ivan Danov, Nicholas, Kalsas, Mesam, and Nikos again was back on that team. So we find that the reason it was actually rebuilt as an internal product was because quite a few teams actually found that they had the same problems that the original designers had. We think of it as kind of your way of because I'll actually tell you what our users say the need it solves for them. Standardized workflows. So this comes about because when you're working in kind of like the enterprise data science space, you're working in a company that produces code as the final deliverable of what should be happening. If you're not working in a kind of like standard way with your teammates, things become like kind of hard to keep track of like what's going on. You choose to set up your project in your own way. Handovers become terrible because you have to go and like find the person who actually wrote the code base like forever ago, try to get them to explain to you what was going on. And then there are also problems around collaboration. We obviously talk about use of Jupyter notebooks primarily for data science work. But when you're creating a machine learning product, for instance, it's even hard for two people to work on the same Jupyter notebook at a time instead of working in Python script. So Kedro kind of solves a lot of issues around this whole thing of standardized workflows, and then making it easy for us to collaborate while we build this great software. Well, actually build data science code that needs to be turned into software.
Lais, do you want to complement that?
Well, that was very, very summarized. I just wanted to say that, that is what we're trying to do. I wanted to say that we're not trying to extinct Jupyter notebooks. We're trying to integrate. We're just trying to make the workflow, everyone work with a better workflow. We're just trying to enable communication between in teams and between teams as well, and trying to make sure that everyone works in a streamlined way and produces very good production ready code right from the start.
That's awesome. So can you explain the history of the name and the logo for Kedro?
We've had so many names because naming things is hard. The original name of Kedro was actually Carbon AI. Then it became Kernel AI. That was all internal before we open source. I mean, like we even tried to drop the AI, so it was just kernel. But then we couldn't call it kernel because there's many things called kernel, right? The process of renaming Kedro just before open source meant that we went through, I think at one point the team generated 100 names that had to meet certain criteria before we actually got down to top 5, and Kedro was the winning one from that one. I can say Kedro was almost called Burano at one point, but I'm glad we settled on Kedro in the end. In terms of how we think of the logo as well, we have a very we have an incredible design unit within Quantum Black, and they decided to prioritize shapes for how the Kedro logo was built. Kedro was one of a few internal products that have this kind of like shape-based, very distinct logo branding. So that's actually what we went with.
Yeah, and then the name Kedro, it's a metaphor, a Greek metaphor for core. So it means the center of the earth. So the way we see it is Kedro is the center of your analytics project. And yeah, it ties up very well. And I love that when Yetu said was talking about the logo, our lead designer just showed up on the chat as well. So Gabriel, thank you very much for the work that you put in the design. We love you. And he's also the DJ. He's the one that has been making the Kedro playlists.
You have a Kedro playlist? That's amazing.
Edition 2 was launched today. It's the Friday gift for all the releases we've been doing this week.
Okay, this is an amazing process. I feel like other open source projects should have playlists. I would like to know, for example, what the Jupyter playlist is. Okay, so can either of you describe to me how you differentiate yourself from alternative projects out there?
Mm-hmm. So I think this is actually where we get to like the actual intent of why Kedro's around. We think about it as standardized workflows. We think about it as collaborative data science. We focus on the problem of how do we write code, data science code that is deployable? How do we work together so that it's high standard, well-tested code, and it's a proper machine learning product before we deploy it? But everyone gets really, I think they get really excited when they hear that we have a pipeline abstraction in Kedro, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like a pipelining tool. And we're like, not quite, because the other pipelining tools that exist in industry have a different focus. They decide to prioritize this whole thing of how do we think about orchestration and scheduling. So how do we, if we know that we have some code that we want to run, how do we make sure that it's running on Sunday at 5 a.m. and if one database fails to run, like it will retry until like it's successful. So we see tools in that range of like Airflow, Luigi, Dagster, and Prefect, which focus on that problem specifically, where we focus a full step behind that, which is like, we know that you need to do some sort of experimentation while writing this production code. How do you work in a structured way while you get it so that you have something that is deployable when it's time to move? The previous tools don't actually look at the back end of that, which is, they just assume that you have something that's deployable.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to say as well that like we try to cover everything on your project. So we go from the exploratory phase on your Jupyter notebooks. We have on our template, we have a folder with notebooks that all your notebooks go there. And there's like a little bit of a tweak that you can do and use your CLI as well. And you can convert that notebook straight into nodes. They go straight into your workflow. And we have testing done there as well. Like we've done everything that you can think of that you need when you're building your data pipelines. Like it's from A to Z, and then we have a little bit more on the back as well, because there's also Kedro hooks that you can hook in anything that you need and make your project even bigger and expand it with more easiness.
I think maybe just like there's one more point about the hooks thing that I could actually mention. This has actually come from our users in the open source world. They were the first ones to actually tell us this, and we're like, oh, this is interesting. But they call us kind of like the Django for data scientists, for data science, or the React for data science. So we come into a space where there are no frameworks for how data scientists should collaborate together and create great code. So we're among the first in the space. And we're actually fulfilling a lot of needs around standardization of like how those workflows look. So sometimes I think to some users, we do appear like crazy because everyone's like, why do I need this thing? But then they run into so many issues which Kedro solves for, and then they eventually come around and they're like, actually, we get why this thing exists, because we try to, this is actually the user journey. It's really cool. You run into issues, then you try to build your own framework to try and solve it. And then you look around and you realize, oh, wait, there's this Kedro thing that has everything already. And then they eventually pick up Kedro, which is quite cool to see.
So I just saw someone commenting in the chat as well about the visualization. So I think it's also worth to mention that we also have Kedro Viz. There is our specific visualization tool that it's based on CLI that you can just type Kedro Viz and see exactly what's going on in your pipelines. And we have actually a few users as well. They use that feature to debug their code. So they look at how they actually build, they structure, and they're like, okay, wait a second. We're building this big system in our head. No. I need to just type Kedro Viz on the CLI and see what's going on with why the code I'm writing. So it's, yeah.
Well, I can definitely see why you have so many fans. It sounds awesome. And I definitely think there's a need for it. I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions at the Livestorm app, and then we'll try to answer those in the Q&A section at the end. So please type your questions in and we'll try to answer them later. So yeah, I think you discussed this a bit, but what technology is Kedro built on? Like, can you describe a bit how that's done?
Cool. So we're actually completely Python. It's a completely Python library. We actually used to use a makefile within the library template to actually do our CLI commands and everything. Because okay, let me actually talk about the components of Kedro. We talk about a project template generated by cookie cutter data science, but modified to be kind of like with the best practice of all the teams that have ever used Kedro before. We've got 170 client projects that have used Kedro. So it's across industries. And we basically built that feedback in. We talk about a data catalog, which is kind of like our series of like data connectors to connect to any data source, local cloud storage, Hadoop file systems if you're using a PySpark workflow. And that uses either the Python or YAML API as well. So there is support for PyYAML inside of Kedro, at least for the data catalog. We talk about from there, the pipeline abstraction, it's just purely Python. And then we talk about Kedro Viz, which is our pipeline visualization tool built purely on top of like the pipeline script. And that is a React app. You can think of that works quite nicely. It opens up a local host server, and you can visualize your pipeline as you work. And that's essentially the components of Kedro. We do support other things. I think if you're deploying Kedro projects, there's a lot of flexibility to do that in many ways. And think of it, it's part of our business model. We're consulting. We work with whatever the client has. So we obviously have to deploy in many ways. But you can check out the Kedro Docker plugin, which will package your Kedro project into a Docker container. So you've got everything, your whole project packaged in there. And yeah, there are a few other options like that.
I don't really have anything to add to this on this answer because, well, basically that QB is a Python house, and I learned that on my first day, and that's what we're sticking with.
That's perfect. Thank you for describing that. I know we've talked a little bit about who started Kedro. Can you tell me a little bit about who maintains the project? Because you've been using a lot of we's, like we are doing this, right? So I'm very curious about who is maintaining it.
Yeah, there is no ways. We actually have like a large team that actually sit behind Kedro. So I'm product manager. Ivan Danov is the Kedro tech lead on the kind of like Python core side of the library and some of the primary components there. We've got Richard Westenra, who's the tech lead on the pipeline visualization tool. He's a front-end engineer. Dimitri Deribin, who is a software engineer. Lorena Balan, software engineer. Keto Kuni, software engineer. And then we've got Lim Hoang, who's also an incredible software engineer in the team. Andriy Ivanuik, another software engineer. And then we've got Jo Stitchbury, who I guess you guys have been raving about our documentation. You can thank her for that. We've got Lais up as our developer advocate, kind of like as our interface between Kedro as a library and our open source community with all our users. And then we've got Meryl Thiessen as well, who's another one of our software engineers. And she comes in as we introduce kind of new features. When we talk about the roadmap, I'll be able to go into that one a bit more. And that's essentially the Kedro team. We're a family. And yeah, it's an absolute joy working with the group.
Yeah, so I'm quite new to the team. I started working in QB around 3 or 4 months ago. And the thing for me that it was very obvious to see right from I think first week was how meticulous about code quality and specifications everyone is. There is this very high standard of communication, very high standard of documentation internally as well. And it's amazing to be able to be part of a team like that, because everyone is super nice, especially with the newbie here that breaks Circle CI checks, that breaks GitHub sometimes as well. Yeah, but yeah, it's been really, really cool, and the team is absolutely amazing. I couldn't ask to work on a better team.
Well, if you haven't broken the CI, you're not really working, right?
Yeah, I feel like all of us have broken the CI at some point.
You see, Dimitri, one of the oldest software engineers behind Kedro, told me when I submitted when I merged one of the commits that wasn't supposed to be merged at all. And I just went there and clicked merge, squash and merge. And I went back to him and I was like, I am so sorry. He was like, don't do that again. But again, if you never broke GitHub, you're not a developer. So yeah. Okay. Rule of thumb. I take that with me for life. That's it.
So can you describe a bit about what communities and users are your contributors from?
So sure, I can actually talk about even our support model as well. So in terms of how the Kedro team maintains the repo is we have you will note every week, there's kind of the same person who will be commenting on GitHub issues and pull requests and accepting pull requests and helping users through pull requests, because we have a rotating role in the team called the Kedro Wizard. And it's your job to make sure that everyone has a great time coming to the repo, you get your questions answered. And if you're posting stuff on Stack Overflow because you're stuck, we'll be looking at those ones as well. But the really cool thing about this is that our network has grown beyond us and beyond the Kedro team just doing these. So we do have superstar users across the web. You'll see Waylon Walker is quite active, blogging and answering people's questions. You'll see Tam, who is also known as Data Engineer 1. If you ever go Google that on YouTube to actually see an entire stack of amazing videos introductory videos about Kedro. But he also publishes plugins about Kedro and then answers user questions. All the way to well, I think maybe one of my favorite communities is actually the Kaggle Japan community, where Kedro is being used by the grandmasters of Japan because it solves a problem around reproducible workflows. I actually see Tam is online. Oh my goodness! You can actually check that one out. So. Growing community of users, different use cases. You'll find that Kedro is also used in academia as well, because there's problems around reproducible data science for papers that are published. So students pick it up as their ideal choice for making those things happen. But of course, we know it did evolve out of industry applications. So it's been really, really cool. I think Lais has been the pioneer of this work as we connect with different companies that are picking up Kedro across the globe. And I think we discovered over 200 users just in the separate companies. But within Quantum Black and McKinsey, we also have hundreds of users as well that we have access to. So lots of places to get user feedback from.
Yeah, we have, there is one of my, I can't say favorite because that's too biased, but one of the projects about that have been using Kedro is the open source Latin America. that it's basically this like huge community of coders, data scientists, and data engineers that have been working with public data from Argentina and some other countries in South America to find out solutions to everyday issues. So they use open data on a non-profit organization. They use Kedro to find out solutions for those problems, and that's wonderful. Like it's such a big social impact. It's so awesome to have a user base that is just so engaged with the community, their own community that is in another continent, and they message us on LinkedIn sometimes. It's like, yeah, so we're doing this and we're so excited, and they're like, okay, can you help? We would like to talk to you because we need a little bit of help over here. It's like, yes. So everyone is super engaged and everyone is trying to do the best they can all the time, to make sure that we actually get the results that we're looking for, because Kedro is going to become the standard on data science and machine learning data pipelines, and that's the goal. We're the React of data science. That's it. I'm
loving this, and also it's amazing how vibrant both your user and developer communities are. It's really fun to hear this from both of you. So okay, I'm really curious, is the project participating in any diversity and inclusion efforts? And if so, what are they?
Sure, I can maybe speak about how we do community management and then also how we've participated in sprints, because those would be the clearest ways to actually see it. This actually, Lais, this would be like beyond, before your time. But when we open sourced Kedro, we were worried about like, how do we actually present a good open source project to the world? Being McKinsey's first open source project, these things are important. So there was one weekend where I spent, I think I must have trolled the web looking through how people say what is best practice for community engagement and what should you do and what should you not do. And that made us a kind of like communication guideline for how we talk to our users, how we turn down pull requests that maybe aren't aligned with the projects gracefully and kindly. And then also, how do we answer questions in the best way, especially when sometimes we've had a few trolls as well, but we still deal with them with the proper kindness and respect that everyone is due on the library as well. So I think in terms of like trying to create that environment across Kedro, we've tried to make it welcoming for anyone who has to interact with us at this layer, done in this way. The second place would be, we love participating in sprints. So an example of this one would be, maybe I work with the London Python Sprint group, where we had an organizer, Chuk Ho, who came in and was like, well, we're going to have a lot of newbies coming who have never contributed to open source before. How will we support them with their journey of learning, not firstly how to contribute to open source, and then therefore how to contribute to the Kedro project. So we had a great time actually teaching people how to create their pull requests for the first time. Because we know typically in this space, Black women and then underrepresented or minoritized ethnic people are very, very underrepresented. So for us, it was super exciting to see that majority of the people now, first-time contributors, were women, were minoritized ethnic people participating in this project. But it also means we do things like, I will create GitHub issues which have just a single fix for a typo. I mean, it's faster for me to actually fix it in the docs, but for me to go and like write a nice explanation of like, this is exactly what the change is, and it's just a typo fix, is important to me, because it means that there's low-hanging fruit for people to contribute and still make our docs better, whatever that arrangement looks like. So whenever we have done sprint participations since then, I think Lais can maybe talk about the last sprint that we did. This is something that we specifically focus on so that we can get people sunk into open source and what it means.
Yeah, so that's what the most powerful actions that we're trying to do as well, that we did in the last trimester, and that we're going strong again. There is making sure that we increase diversity and inclusion in Kedro collaboration. So we participated on the EuroPython sprints. So we had a weekend. We're there sitting the entire weekend, helping people, making their first PR, and basically taking them by the hand and showing them exactly what are the steps. chatting to them and showing how to use Kedro and demoing one-to-one. And it was so awesome to interact with them. And Yeto actually received there was one that wrote this DevTo blog post saying that Yeto and I were both his knight on shining armors, because we're just helping him getting through the battle of making PRs. It was adorable. But yeah, and we're going strong as well. Again, with the sprints, we're participating with PyData Global now next month with another open sprint. Then we're part of PyCon India as well with more sprints. And there's Hacktoberfest next month as well, that we also have mentored sprints. So we're trying as much as we can to get everyone to try Kedro and to get those newbies to do their first PR. Then I don't know if I can, but if I could, I would like to talk about the some initiatives that Quantum Black also has on inclusion and diversity, because they also help us on that. So a few weeks ago, I think we had an initiative called Code Fast Girls that we organized. There was a kind of meetup, all social distance, of course. But we had two of our female software engineers going live and talking to them and talking to young girls and telling them how is the journey throughout IT and how is to work with data science, how is to work with analytics and answering questions. And I think that's so important as well, because there's so many girls that want to get into data science, but since it's still a very male-dominated field, they still feel like they can't. So it's amazing to be able to have the opportunity to be part of that. And also, there's one more thing. This in QB, every month we have this diversity and inclusion event that is basically having discussions about subjects such as female presence in IT roles, imposter syndrome, privilege, and they actually get people to go on the spot and to tell their journey, to talk to us, and to tell us exactly how they got to where they are today. And especially for me that I'm starting, it's really, really good to have that experience.
Well, that all sounds wonderful, and I think sounds like a real goal for other open source communities to achieve, like being welcoming and just having newcomers feel safe and respected in the community. I think that's an amazing goal to have.
Yeah, you are doing amazing community building. It feels like it's really robust and so welcoming. I'm curious, actually, I have a follow-up question to this. You were mentioning that you did some research on sort of best practices of how to be kind. Is that available in your documentation anywhere, that other projects could be inspired by it, perhaps?
I would definitely like to see that as well, if you have that.
I could actually just literally copy paste the document into the documentation. I don't think, or maybe it's a GitHub issue that we've linked on how we think about community management as a whole. But yeah, I'm happy to share that, because it was essentially a summary of everyone's amazing insight on how to do this, and that was what that document became. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like it sounds so. I mean, your community really seems very vibrant, and I would love to learn a little bit more about the practices you all use.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I would definitely copy that model for NumPy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm how do I use this in my communities?
The best spirit of open source. That's what it all means. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I guess it's time for us to go into the project demo, where we'll get to see some of the cool features of Kedro and how it works. So I would like to ask, Yetunde, are you getting ready? So while Yetunde is getting set up, we would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, QuantSight, for sponsoring this episode of Open Source Directions. QuantSight, creating value from data. So whenever you're ready, Yetunde, feel free.
I'm going to be able to share the correct window. Hold on a second. Sorry.
Yeah, it's no problem. It's just life as it is now. Sharing screens and muting and unmuting yourself is just like...
There's so many times I forget to unmute, and then I just see
Oh,
myself
it's
silently
like
talking to myself. It's
constantly.
constant. That's so true.
Recording. Okay, there's some weird... hang on a moment. Let me actually see if I can start with Kedro Viz in the meanwhile. Okay, it seems like my sharing permissions are strange on my computer. Let me see if I can try to resolve that. You guys can just talk over me while I do that quickly.
So maybe, Lais, do you want to say something about the project or...
So let's see. I can share with you something that I've been doing now, that I've been working for the last few weeks. That is this. I'm working on a tutorial now, an advanced tutorial on integrating Kedro and Great Expectations. I don't know if you're familiar with Great Expectations. Tam there is over there in the chat, is actually helping me a lot with this. That it's basically, so he built a plugin called Kedro Great that integrates the both of them and just makes super easy to use both of them together. But I didn't want to use his plugin. I wanted to do it by hand. So he's been helping me with that, and I would love for anyone that wants to try it out, just send me a message on Twitter, and I would love to just share it with you. It's open on my GitHub page, but yeah, I would love to have some feedback. And I think Yetu is ready now.
I am indeed. Perfect. We're good to go. So what I'm going to show you now is essentially how you can actually access a demo for Kedro quite easily. With this one, you'll see that there's a virtual environment activated. We use Conda. You can use whatever you want. And we've already got like Kedro installed as well. So I've already pip installed Kedro. So I'm just going to jump straight into this whole concept of creating a project and then actually walk you through the code base and what that looks like. So over here, what you see over here is a CLI command that says Kedro new, which means just a new project. And we've got this thing called starter over here, which is you can think of them like WordPress templates. You know, how when I need to create a new WordPress blog, I could choose like whatever template I'd want to set my blog up with. But in this case, Kedro actually supports being able to do that with project templates that you'd use for your analytics code. So you can choose ones with examples. You can choose maybe set up one for an AWS setup if you want, or for Azure, whatever flavor you want on it. And this one just has a simple example that uses the iris dataset example in it. So I'm going to just press enter here. And we're going to get some interactive prompts, which will actually walk us through the whole thing of setting up a project. So it asks me to enter in a human readable name for my project. I'm going to say demo open source directions. Actually, let's call it that.
Yes, we're a demo now.
And I'm gonna actually just let me just raise the screen for you. I'm just gonna press enter because I'm gonna accept the default name, and then we have a new project created. So I'm actually just gonna open up this folder over here, and now you actually get to see the start of the Kedro project template. So we see we have a place to include configuration. Configuration in Kedro world means how do I keep my hard-coded file paths for loading and saving data out of my code base? And in somewhere that it's completely changeable. How do I keep my parameters as well outside of my code base, making it easier for me to experiment, but also a place to have a single place for me to actually just be able to control my data science experiments. So we'll go through configuration in more detail. Data is essentially a place for me to store data, but remember, we don't recommend committing data to Git. but you will see that there's a certain folder structure that's present in the data folder, from raw data all the way to reporting data. And this is just a workflow that was recommended in Quantum Black for how you think of processing data at different stages. What it does, it allows you to work with your teammates quite easily, because you know at every single stage, okay, let's say for the intermediate stage, that we've only really cleaned up like the column types in that column, so in that layer. So we shouldn't expect to see any other type of data transformation in that layer, which is really good for reproducibility if you need to go back because you've made a mistake. But in this case, you will see that we've got the iris dataset example embedded in it because this came with this project template. So I'll close that. There's a space for you to include documentation. So if you use Google Doc strings in your code base, we have Sphinx integration that will automatically create documentation so that your code is well-documented data science code, so everyone knows what's going on. I'll briefly show you logs, which essentially uses the Python logging library. So you have a record of like what's happening in your Kedro runs. Lais touched on the fact that we do have integration with Jupyter Notebooks to support kind of like an well, I guess there's maybe 3 reasons why you would use Jupyter Notebooks in the Kedro world. Exploratory data analysis, because it's really great for that, and that whole initial workflow. We'd also perhaps use it for maybe creating those Python functions that you need before you move those into Python script. And then the third thing is that you might also support a notebook for reporting and presentation at the end, once you have your workflow. But we believe like everything else should be in Python script because there's so many benefits that you get from that. And then we've got source, which is essentially your Python source code. If I open up open source directions, you'll see a Python package there, and pipelines. We'll be walking through data engineering and data science pipelines here. So what I'm actually going to do over here is go a bit deeper into each one of the folders so you can see what's in each one of them. And then we're going to do a Kedro run, because Kedro run now works out of the box. And you're gonna essentially walk through your first Kedro pipeline run with us. You will see a range of supporting hidden files that are referenced here. For instance, isort is used when we have a Kedro lint command, so that you can lint your code. And you will see things like our CLI, which essentially our command line interface, which has commands that you can add to the Kedro run command. So let's go into configuration and let's go into base. So you'll see a range of like boilerplate, which explains what's exactly happening in the data catalog. So this is actually where we talk about you being able to specify file paths in configuration. So Kedro uses what we call our data catalog, which is our series of data connectors. You'll see that we support many different file types here. So in this case, the iris data set was in a CSV. So we'll just load it with using the pandas API and just say we're loading it with the pandas CSV. You'll see that we actually specified where this data is going to be loading from, and it's a relative file path to this file over here. So data, O1, role, and iris that we're going to be loading. I mentioned that configuration also has support for parameters as well. So when we go through the data science experiment, you'll see that we've actually referenced our different parameters that you would have used in the setup right here for you. So I'm going to close that. You will see there's an additional folder called local. That's essentially where you keep your secrets. So if you've got any credentials or you've got any configuration specific to your IDE, you keep it in here because it's get ignored. So it means that no one else is really accessing those things. Remember, it's not like best practice to see credentials in a project. Victor, to your comment about seeing data in the project, you were shocked. It's just the way that this example is set up. In real practice, people normally use files, basically cloud storage, because they're using S3 or they're using Azure blob storage. So you'll never actually find any data populated in that folder at all. But the folder itself, the contents of the folder still get ignored because that stuff shouldn't be committed to Git, ideally. So I'm going to close that. Docs folder, I might actually run through that command if we have enough time. But the next one that's most interesting and probably the most is like the bread and butter of Kedro is essentially how we think about constructing a pipeline. All you need to know is how to write Python functions. So I'm going to open up the data engineering pipeline, and we're going to have a look at a folder called nodes. So here's where I actually introduce a concept to you. In Kedro land, a node is a Python wrapper that has space for an input and an output. And you'll actually see it when we construct the pipeline together, how that actually works. But you see in the nodes folder that all we do is essentially specify a Python function. That's it. This is all you need to actually get rolling in Kedro. When I actually open up the pipeline.py file, we actually now get introduced to our pipeline extraction in itself. So this node takes in that Python function called split data. Okay, its inputs are the example iris data that we had referenced in our data catalog. So in configuration, that iris data set. We also take in those parameters that we were talking about. In this case, it's a test data ratio split. And the outputs of this are a train and test split for X and Y. That's all we do with this very simple pipeline. If I have a look at the data science workflow as well, you'll see some more Python functions under nodes. So one that trains models, another one that predicts, and another one that reports on accuracy. And when we have a look at the pipeline for this one, you'll see it. So we've got one node right here. So it took in the Python function for training model, and it had certain inputs specified here. Our example, basically our train data sets for both X and Y, and a series of parameters that were needed for those data sets to work. And we output an example model. This example model is actually taken in as an input for the predict node. So we now do the predict function, take in the example model, take in another one of the test sets for X, and have example predictions come out. And then when we want to report on the accuracy of this, we have another Python function, report accuracy, if you saw in the previous version, and we take in the example predictions, we take in our test, the Y, test Y split, and we don't really have an output, it's none, because we're just going to be checking that from logs. So let me actually show you what it looks like from code, or in terms of the actual logs for this one. I'm going to do a Kedro run. Oh, wait. I need to change into the project directory, open source directions. Cool. And now I'm going to do Kedro run. Cool. So now we see some logs that have been outputted here. We see that in our data catalog, we loaded in that example iris data set from configuration. It was that CSV data set that we needed. And we loaded all sorts of parameters that we needed for this experiment to run. But the only part that's perhaps useful to you is this one, the model accuracy is 100%, which is essentially like how this pipeline runs. It's a very silly one. One additional thing that I might want to show you now, which is this pipeline is actually pretty simple. We try to stretch it as much as possible to show as much detail as I can. But I can show you what it looks like when we talk about more complex pipeline visualizations. So I'm going to open up a Kedro Viz pipeline visualization. That's kind of like the last step in this workflow. And you'll kind of see, while Kedro has applications on kind of like more simple workflows, it definitely has space to work for projects that have 1,000 nodes and 10 people teams working on it. But it's also still good for applications where it's just you and it's just your university project, and you just want to make sure that you have a reproducible workflow. So if we look at this, what you're seeing over here is an example, you could say an example retail application pipeline. So if I actually filter down to the data engineering side of it, when I refer to this process of data engineering, purely the data processing stages, cleaning data, transforming it, creating features. So we take in some shopware data, we load it, we do some data cleaning in the intermediate layer. Remember, we spoke about that whole thing of the layered workflow. And then eventually we create some features here at the end. If I have a look at the data science pipeline for this, let's actually break it down a little bit further. We have some model explanations that are done. So we take in some features. We want to use some form of explainable AI in this pipeline, and we work with that. We also want to implement some form of performance monitoring as well. We do some model training, obviously, because we need to put some outputs out. I don't know, this pipeline is really random. You have some optimization steps too. And then we have a reporting layer where the outputs land up at dashboards. And this is essentially a tool that you can use for communicating with different teammates on your teams, like maybe non-technical teammates that still need to understand like how the data pipeline works, because you can have a conversation with them at this level about what your pipeline is doing, and don't have to try and scare them by showing them code for them to get what's going on. We find that Kedro is used that way, but some teams will actually use it to onboard team members onto how their pipeline is structured. So yeah, that is essentially Kedro in a nutshell. With you looking at a pipeline visualization, you'll be able to find this online if you have any more questions.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Yetunde. I think it was extremely polished, and like I said in the chat, you can see the love that went into the design of this thing. Like, you can see that it's pretty simple to use and pretty human in the interface and everything. I found it awesome. So just quickly, I don't know if any of you want to discuss a bit about the roadmap and, like, broadly speaking, where does the project go from here?
Cool. So with this one as well, and I also saw some questions about does it Dask. We have like we spoke about the data connectors, right, and how they're very extensible. So you will find a Dask data set embedded in there. If you want to create more in the set, go for it. So you definitely go for it in terms of contributions. And then we mentioned that Kedro's place fits in the space of how do I get stuff to deploy? Like, how do I get good quality code, high quality code that I'm proud of, that is deployable? So when we look at like how you schedule runs on different systems, we actually leave that flexibility to you. But you will see things like we even support a Kedro Airflow plugin, which converts your Kedro pipeline into an Airflow DAG, so you can take advantage of Airflow's amazing ability to do good orchestration and scheduling for you. Now, in terms of the roadmap, you will see that we've been expanding how we think about hooks in Kedro. I guess the concept was kind of borrowed from React, but it allows for more extensibility across the Kedro framework for you to plug into different parts of the framework. You will see that we're adding new things to Viz, so really building on that whole thing of people using Kedro Viz to talk to their technical teammates about how their pipeline is structured. So look out for this amazing like side panel when it's eventually built. It will actually show you your code for your different workflows and also what configuration you were using in the site. We have another internal product that will be renamed. So I'm not even going to give you the name because, like, you know, we're bad at names when it's on the inside. But when it's on the outside, the name will be fixed. And this product specifically helps us with the concept of experiment tracking, where we look at, like, I know I'm a data scientist. I used a random forest model here. I used these parameters to make this random forest model. Maybe it had an accuracy of 92%, but then I did things and then it was 67%, and I want to go back. Instead of me taking notes somewhere, I actually just use something that has logged these things for me. So it's easy for me to go back and revisit my old workflow. And that's essentially where this functionality fits. And we will be releasing it in some form on Kedro as well. And then we talk about work with Great Expectations. We have another internal plugin. Great Expectations is this amazing library that does data validation. So think of it as this whole thing of, when I built my data pipeline, I was using a table that was on AWS S3. It was in some test environment, and it had 8 columns that I needed to run my pipeline. When I deployed it in production, the table had 6 columns because someone had removed columns from the data set. How do I know that my pipeline is failing because it's a data error? And that's essentially where Great Expectations plays a role, because it'll essentially tell you it's failing because these 2 columns are missing. And you know exactly where to go and fix the error. So that's actually where, if you guys haven't checked out Great Expectations, it's a great project. We have an internal plugin that's being dog-fooded internally that we hope to release as well. So you can look out for that. And then I guess with all of these things, like, we're looking at how we further position ourselves in the open source data science community, because I think someone, Waylon actually says this, so one of our really key users, he's like, Kedro is in a space where everyone needs a framework for how they work, but people don't know that they need a framework yet, and they're searching for Kedro. So really, how do we get awareness out in that space is like really, really important to us. So yeah, you should see very exciting things coming on the Kedro end. And yeah, we're very excited for the future.
So I don't know if Lace wants to say something.
Oh, sorry, I was aware of time. I was just a little bit aware of time now. Yeah, so I think Yeto covered all the expansions that, like, all the roadmap that we're trying to develop the future for Kedro for now. I guess that, well, I'm not really developing things that much. Like, I know where we're going, but I guess I would love to know from the community, if I could give like a shout out to everyone. I would love to know from the community which kind of tutorials you'd like to see, what is it that everyone is looking for, because we're trying to make Kedro more and more accessible for everyone, and there is a lot of love put into making that framework, and we absolutely love Kedro, and we want the community to love Kedro as well. So help us.
So would you like them to file an issue if they like want to add something? Is that your preferred pathway?
Yes. Please do. Yes.
And so going over the questions, I guess we have only time for one question, but it fits really nicely into what you were saying, because the question is, do you have a page with some specific examples? If you have a problem, and how do you solve that with Kedro? I think that's a great idea for a tutorial, actually.
Yeah.
Yes,
I agree. Go ahead, Yeto.
We'll put it onto the backlog, but not like, when PMs say that, they normally mean that it's not going to be done. But this one is actually a ticket on our backlog. But it's supposed to be done in the spring. So we will have that page up for you guys, and we'll share the link with you.
Awesome. So I guess we're coming to the end of the episode. So we get our rant or rave section, which is each person gets a 15-second soapbox to rant or rave about whatever topic. Yetunde, you go first.
I'm ranting about the end of summer. I'm very worried that there's as a South African, when I see this encroaching nighttime and it's going to be dark at 4 p.m., I get very nervous, and it's coming for me. It's coming for me.
Laïs?
I'm going to be insensitive, and I'm going to rant about COVID.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm going to rant about social distancing and how all human contact I've been having for the last 3 months is all remote and Zoom based. That's what I want to rant about. It's making my days not as great as they could be, but we'll survive. It's all right.
Madikin?
Okay, I'm gonna rave about how woodchucks run. So woodchuck is like a small, forest animal. There's some that live outside my house, and so sometimes I see them like walking around. They don't really like humans, so when they notice me, they run, and they're like a little blob of fur. They sort of look like an otter, but running, a really chunky otter. And when they run, it's extremely cute. So check them out. They're hilarious and amazing.
So my rave is going to be the opposite of Yetunde's, because it's starting to get hot in here in Brazil. So it's almost spring. So the weather is nice, and it's starting to be warmer. So I'm happy about that. I think we can maybe enjoy some time outside now that things are getting a little better.
Wow, you're rubbing it in for us Northern Hemisphere people.
I'm so sorry.
Brazilian food, and now we just need to come and visit.
Yeah, this is like a sandwich of making us jealous about Brazil, I feel like.
I will all be very welcome here.
I can't back you up on this one, though. I could back you up on the food one, but this one, no. I'm in Ireland. There is rain every day. Even when the forecast says there's going to be 22 Celsius, that's our summer. It's rainy and it's cold.
Well, I'm so sorry for you, but that's how things go, unfortunately. So,
but I'm in Brazil, so I'm okay.
anyway, that's all the time we have for today. And I thank you all so much for watching, for listening, and also for participating. Yetunde and Lais, that was awesome. You can find us on Twitter at OpenTeams Inc. and at Quantsite AI. Yetunde, where can people find you and Kedro?
So Kedro, easily accessible. If you search on GitHub for us, you'll find everything related to the project there. If you need to ask more questions, head over to Stack Overflow and definitely do that. But otherwise, you'll find us on Twitter as well. I'm there at Yetunde Dada. I ask questions. I harass users in the nicest way to learn feedback about the project. And I'm pretty sure you can also find Lais that way as well. Lais_BSC.
Yes, indeed. So Lais underscore BSC. We posted both of them on the chat, and Yetu is at Yetunde Dada. We're both on Twitter. We spend a long time on Twitter, so you can find us there. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on GitHub. You can find us under the maintainers and collaborators on Kedro, the Kedro GitHub page. If you Google our names, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be there somewhere as well. So yeah, just send us DMs. Just come and say hello. We love talking to users.
All over the internet. So if you liked what you saw today, please go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe to see more of this content. We look forward to you joining us next episode so you can drop in for a discussion on Drupal.
Sounds great.